Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Violet Gray, forever GM and stand-up comic, and it is very nice to meet you all.
Thank you for joining us again. Originally, it was supposed to be a four-person discussion about Book of the Dead, the new Pathfinder Second Edition book. But unfortunately, I made the mistake of scheduling this on a holiday. Oops. So it's just us two. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this book. I'm really excited about it. There's five major sections to this book. There's the Prayers for the Living, Hymns for the Dead, the Grim Crypt, Lands of the Dead, and March of the Dead. And I guess we could say outright that what's really different about this book is that it's not just a generic book about spells or a generic book about a bestiary or anything like that. It tries to tackle a topic by bringing all sorts of different options for game masters and players. What do you think?
So one of the things I really liked about this book immediately was that for those of you who don't know, one of the main NPCs in the Pathfinder universe is a necromancer named Geb. And much of the book is sort of written from his perspective with his biases. And no, he doesn't like Pharasma, who hates undead. She's the deity of life and death. And I like how it started with that. I also liked, they have a section called Folk Remedies, which I think adds culture to the game. It tells you what various cultures use them for, like salt to ward against evil spirits, that sort of thing. But it doesn't actually tell you whether or not it works. And so to your point, I think they did put a lot of effort into trying to create an overall feel and an overall culture in some aspects of this book.
Yeah, I noticed that there were the writing of this book was not careful. What's the word I'm looking for? You could tell this book was inspired by different things around the world. Like I'm not gonna lie, I was shocked to see Urona.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
hey, wait a minute, that's the wailing undead woman.
Yeah, which is an Hispanic or Latina, a mythological monster. So I was very impressed with that. But yeah, this book is unlike any. Maybe the closest I could think of is the new Ravenloft book that came out some time ago. But this one seems more focused on giving you what you want and giving you a good explanation of what the undead side of Galarian is like. Um,
Yes.
let's look at the first part of it, Prayers for the Living. What did you think of it? What were some of your favorite parts about it?
Well, for Prayers for the Living, I thought that once again, I don't think it got quite into the crunch of it quite yet with Prayers for the Living. Um, I did like, I did enjoy reading the concepts of the undead because one of the things early in the book, it sort of fleshes out the principles behind undeath. One of the other things I liked about Prayers for the Living is I really enjoyed some of the backgrounds. I like to play a lot of rogues, and for example, the grave robber background was sort of right up my alley. It's strength or dex, and then underworld lore and experienced smuggler, and it's like I like something like that because that's something I would just play even in a non-undead specific campaign. I did enjoy some of the tools, like for example, the bottle of sunlight, which could function as a lantern, but then you could throw it and it could harm undead. I thought stuff like that was really cool. I did really like some of the tools and stuff that I saw in that chapter.
Yeah, I enjoyed the archetypes. So this chapter it's interesting. It's a mix of things because it wants to show you that if you're a character trying to fight the undead, these are your options. And toward the end of this chapter, they have a bunch of archetypes. They have a exorcist, hallowed necromancer, soul warden, and undead slayer. Undead slayer. When I saw that, I said yes. I've always wanted to do some sort of like a updated, interesting version of like the Buffy lore
Right, right.
into this. into my games. But Soul Warden is interesting. You view the undead very ethically. You're trying to bring them to rest so that the cycle of life and death continues. So
Right.
it's not an aggressive stance. And Hollow Necromancer, the idea of a moralist necromancer is interesting.
Yeah, I really thought that was interesting. One of the things that I wanted to pay attention to was how adaptable an archetype could be if you weren't just like a strictly undead or supernatural focused campaign. And I thought that the Hallowed Necromancer, seeing what they could do, I thought that that was more adaptable to a general campaign than, say, The Exorcist, which is extremely focused. And they say early on in the book that maybe not everything can be used with every campaign. And that turns out to be true. Like The Exorcist, if I was running a game, I would allow that maybe for a more supernatural or undead focused game because it deals with possession and stuff like that. But something like the Hallowed Necromancer, I just thought was a really good idea, which can be used for a supernatural campaign, but can also just be used. And I also thought the Soul Warden, but I was actually hoping that they would do something like that.
Yes, yes. I know necromancy in different role playing games and could be. It's been debated whether or not it's seen as an evil magic to use and whether or not characters should be using it. So the fact that they have this option available is great for
Mhm.
players.
Yeah.
So let's skip to chapter 2, Hymns of the Dead, which is sort of the opposite of chapter 1, where
Mhm.
instead of tools for living characters, like you could say, to go and fight the undead. This is where you actually can be the undead and understand what it's like to be the undead, and play have that
Yes.
as a player character, which I think that's wow, that's interesting because I don't think there's too many games that actually have tried that or they're afraid to try that. You know,
Right. Right.
what are your thoughts?
Oh my gosh. I think that is perhaps one of my favorite parts about this book, specifically for the reason you just mentioned. It's not something that really surprised me when I read it. I couldn't help but smile when I saw the skeleton ancestry. I thought that was pretty interesting. I definitely did not expect to see that, and I liked seeing a lot of the archetypes, like the ghost archetype, the ghoul archetype. um, I wondered if they might do a vampire archetype, so I wasn't that surprised. But that you could be a zombie, I thought that was pretty interesting, and it really did feel comprehensive because usually in most mythos we see undead as purely protagonists, and it seems just more comprehensive. It was like, what if they're not? Like, if an undead can be intelligent, then it can theoretically have a moral structure. And so I thought it was very meticulous that they paid attention to that aspect if they were going to do a book on the undead.
Same thing. I love this section a lot. I think it's probably the most like again, you don't see too many role playing games give you that option of playing an undead. Again, that's usually
Mhm.
the bad person type of thing. But the lich one, I thought it really surprised me the most because I never thought I would see a lich as an option of any sort. Usually, that's something that only evil wizards,
Right.
they don't want to die, so they do this thing, and then they become bad guys, and so the fact that it has that as an option is really interesting. The fact that this exists really changes the idea of what kind of campaigns you can play now
Yes,
and
absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
Pathfinder. It's amazing because you could do like a like a group of different undead characters and having different like to create adventures would be really interesting. Like who would be back? Would it be like another worse undead? Would it be the living? You could do these
Right. Right. You could
very
totally flip it on its head.
yeah, like these anti-tropes almost type adventures.
Right, absolutely. I decided that probably my next Pathfinder campaign I ran would be set in Ustalav. And for those of you who don't know, Ustalav is the closest thing in the Pathfinder universe to Ravenloft. for those of you more familiar with D&D. And I'm so glad I held off on running that campaign now, because I feel like I'd be more prepared with this book. But yeah, for exactly those reasons, the undead and the fleshing out and stuff like that.
There's a book coming out also called The Knights of Lastwall, which deals with the Gravelands, and I can't imagine these two books working well together. And it gives, again, it gives your game so many different options of what it can be, and so I'm excited. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Chapter 3, The Grim Crypt, which is probably one of the best names I've heard for a bestiary section in a book. So yeah, this is one of the biggest parts of the book. There's a huge amount of monsters available that game master can use for their games. What are your thoughts about this chapter?
So my obvious bias is I'm usually the GM. At one point, I was running 3 separate campaigns for 3 separate groups a week. And so I loved this. I loved this resource. I was pleasantly surprised to find that it was a whole bestiary just for undead, because in a lot of my games, I found that I wanted to use the undead, but it was relatively unvaried. Even with 3 bestiaries out, I didn't feel like I had a lot of good resources for undead. And so I loved this. I will say, however, that because so much of it is dedicated to monsters and stuff, it's probably more of a resource for GMs than it is for players, just because so much of it is dedicated to encounters. But as the forever GM, I loved the bestiary. And I loved, like you said, they went and did their homework. They had Yorona, and they had a lot of, and that was another thing. There's not a book on Tian Sha yet, but there's a lot of references to Tian Sha, not only with the creatures, but also with some of the things that are said in some of the flavor text. I thought that was interesting, because I'm waiting for a book on Tian Sha, and they clearly know what they're going to bring up, what they're going to put in it as evidenced in this book. But yes, I very much enjoyed the beasts, especially the lower encounter beasts, because I didn't think there was a lot of variation in lower encounter undead until this book came out.
Yeah, so I haven't run too many Pathfinder games to know like which monsters I think in this are too tough or too soft or anything like that. But the art in this book is just so good. It things like the combusted.
Yes.
Which if you would describe to me, I'm like, okay, yes, a skeleton on fire or a corpse on fire or something like that. I could try and imagine it, but the way they drew it, it looks horrifying.
Yes, absolutely.
The beheaded.
I was about to say that, yeah.
No, please take that back. I watched Reanimator as a kid, and it's some of those
yeah,
some of those things have
exactly
scarred me.
about.
Yeah, yeah. But like even some other ones like Death Coach, which is like what? It's just
Yeah.
it's just fun. I just think that they're a lot of fun to have.
I thought that one of my favorite monsters in the book was what is it called? It is the Tormented, and how it is the undead spirit of someone who has been tortured to death, and their method of torture dictates what powers the undead spirit has. So if they were drowned, they have certain powers. If they were burned, they have certain powers. If they were put on the rack, they have certain powers. And so I thought that was an interesting variation.
Yeah, it reminds me. I don't. It's not like it per se, but Hellraiser. You know, like
Yes.
how you
The
get
Cenobites.
yeah, like how they became them. It's linked to how they were as people. So that
Yes.
I love that too. Not very similar, but I think the role playing aspect I like about The Last Guard. The idea that there's these ghosts that they failed their duty as guards, and they were killed, but they now are stuck there to try to, like their need to complete the mission forces them to stay
Right. Hmm.
unalive. So I thought things like that. There's just so many great creatures in this section. Chapter 4, Lands of the Dead. Pretty self-explanatory. This is where you get kind of like the idea of the different regions in Galarian where the undead exist as a power, from
Right. Right.
Geb to the Gravelands to Mazzali. Um, what are your thoughts?
Well, one thing I did like, because I had something to flesh out Nation of Geb. So I have the supplement, I have the book that is the Nations of Galarian, but I didn't feel like it really went into Geb that much. And so for those of you who haven't read the book yet, uh, it starts with a human merchant who pretty much does almost like a Volo's guide to Geb and talks about what it's like being a human in an undead ruled city. And I thought that was the part that stuck out to me the most. I thought that was really cool. And it also went through, once again, this book was very meticulous. It went through the undead aspects in each of the cultures. So the Mwangi Expanse and Ustalav and Geb. And yeah, I really enjoyed that part.
I really love that this book doesn't feel like it's separate from the other books. Like
Right,
all
absolutely.
like most of the books feel like they're key to the bigger picture of Galarian. Like they like you mentioned before, they reference different lands, and even though the books aren't out yet, it's almost like it's like these like story teases. I guess I'm not sure that's the right
Mhm.
word, but like
Yes.
these
Potential plot hooks.
yes. So you kind of want to know more what's going on over there. But there's
Mhm.
enough here in this chapter so that you get information about each of the civilizations, a bit of their history, who rules this nation, um, a lot of adventure seeds. Even though there's not a lot of this section was never meant to have like lots of maps or things like that. No, just enough so that if you're the type of game master that just wants to know the generator of, let's say the characters just teleport there somehow, at least you have enough to know what's going on so you can homebrew this section of the world.
I loved that they gave you enough to, so for me, I usually write my plots out of whole cloth. I don't depend on modules a lot. And they give you enough to set your imagination aflame a bit when writing for your own campaigns. And I really like that.
So last but not least, chapter 5, March of the Dead, which is an adventure for 4 third level characters. It's hard to talk about this without getting too spoilery, but there's a lot of great information in here, a lot of maps. What are your thoughts?
I read it. Like I said, I don't depend on a lot of modules, but it was very interesting to see the process of how this could be written. I thought it was very interesting. There were some ideas that I certainly hadn't thought of. But yeah, I thought it was cool that it was there. I mean, honestly, I'm probably not going to use it, but it was pretty cool.
Hmm. Do you feel, as someone who's done a lot of Pathfinder, that anyone that's learning how to play or use anyone that wants to use an undead setting for their games, like this is a good adventure to start with?
Oh, absolutely. Especially since it's low level. And so things don't get quite so complicated yet. I do think that if you're just starting and you want to do an undead focus campaign, I do like this module for that. I think it's pretty straightforward. Um, I don't know what your thoughts are. If you decide that that's the direction you want to go, I think this is a good resource for that.
Pathfinder, when they do their adventures, they always do a very tremendous job with it. It's very focused. I can't stand certain adventures or modules, but they're not. Uh, yes, sometimes adventure players do stray, and you may want to have certain tangents ready in case.
Of course.
But
Mhm.
there's all modules that just go in weird directions, and I don't know. It just, to me as a game master, I find it difficult to use. But no, this is very straightforward. The monsters here are horrifying. I don't like cockroaches.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, but again, it just has great maps here. It- a lot of monsters, very good story overall. But yeah, I think I would if I needed to run something like this for the first time, definitely this adventure I would use. I think it's fantastic.
Looking at the map here, Fiona's Faith as a town, I really like this. I would use something like this actually. The map, I would use something like this in one of my games. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I know a lot of people tend to say that oh, Pathfinder's so complicated, but you know, it's not once you get the once you hit your stride and you grow accustomed to the games. I think Pathfinder First Edition would make them appreciate that. but but for something like this, a low level undead campaign, I thought it was good.
Hmm. So in conclusion, what do you think about the book? Is this something that you would definitely pick up?
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, this is something I take public transportation a lot to go to and from work, and so I often need things to read uh, and new ways to, of course, murder all my players. And I will definitely pick this book up. I enjoyed reading the monsters and I enjoyed reading the archetypes, and it gave me some very interesting new items I can throw in my campaign. And yes, it is 100% yes from me. I will definitely pick up this item.
Hmm. Same here. This is book I'm definitely buying. I would say that Pathfinder. Thank you for giving us a digital copy of the book for us to review. But I'm planning to buy a physical copy once it comes out.
Same. Mhm.
Yeah, because it's just the fact that you can have an undead campaign. It's just to me it blows my mind. It's something that I wanted my players and I have wanted to do for years, but there was not a lot of games or rules that have that available. Unless you want to try something from a different system like Vampire the Masquerade, for example, and
Right,
so
right.
forth. But if you want to do fantasy, I'm glad that this exists. Um, any last words or thoughts?
Any last further thoughts? If you are interested in the undead aspects of Pathfinder, I will say that you would be happy with this book. This did it about as well as I could have hoped for. And yeah, so I would just say if you're interested in the undead, this book might be worth picking up for you.
So, viewers, I hope you enjoyed our review. Thank you so much for sticking around. Please like and subscribe, and be careful out there. Have a good day.